for the kingdom. We're going to go back just a little bit for review. What is a parable? A parable is verbal imagery which portrays and illustrates an event or teaching. The main purpose of a parable is to convey an impression and not to construct definitions or establish dogmas. So, and also, I wanted to go over once again what is the kingdom, because it's just really important, because many people don't realize and understand what we're talking about when we say we're searching for the kingdom. So the kingdom, this kingdom that we're talking about, is God's kingdom, of course. This kingdom is to affirm the powerful presence of heaven or God in the hearts and souls of the peoples of the world. It symbolizes the universal establishment of justice, peace, love, joy, harmony, and goodness in the consciousness of every individual. A kingdom that is free of all greed, pride, and prejudice. God's presence, which is the kingdom, essentially, is active on earth through the people. And we have talked about many times how God works through people. An alteration of one's heart and mind brings about the ability to see and participate in God's sovereign presence, which is the kingdom. And we're going to go back to some Aramaic here that lets us distinguish this kingdom, this presence, this counsel of God. And it's based on the Aramaic word malkutha, which is the word for kingdom, but like all other classical Aramaic words, it has several meanings. And so in in our case, we actually employ all three of these meanings: kingdom, counsel, and presence. But the main thing to remember about this kingdom that we're searching for, and I do believe that we, even in our world today, are searching for this kingdom, okay? And if we're looking at it, we can't look at it geographically per se, because the kingdom, God, it's spiritual. It's a spiritual kingdom. And so if we are looking at it kind of like geography and whatnot, we have to see like the whole world, the whole universe, and there's no boundaries. So the kingdom is the sovereign presence of God, whose love, counsel, and guidance is stamped on the hearts and souls of all mankind. And Jesus envisioned the world and the universe. Now you get out of here. I'm recording. Go on. No, get right now. Go on. Go on. Go on. No, you can't be whining. No, get out there. Go on. Get. You have to be quiet. Okay? You have to be quiet. It's too hot in here anyway, so go on out there. And you have to be quiet. It's not time to go to bed yet, so you go on out there and you be quiet. No, now go on. Vika, come on, get out there. Now that's it. Now you stay out there until I'm done in here. Okay? No, you stay out there until I'm done in here. Now you go ahead and you be a good boy. So the kingdom is the sovereign presence of God, whose love, counsel, and guidance is stamped on the hearts and souls of all mankind. And Jesus envisioned this kingdom, and he here on earth, and a kingdom where everyone would get along. There would be no prejudice, no whatnot. Mostly because Jesus taught that God is our parent, everyone, and so we're all children of God. All right, so I hope that clears a little bit about what the kingdom that Jesus was talking about is. Now, the parable, the parable, the setting for the parable tonight, okay? All right, remember in Jesus' time, Israel was occupied by the Romans. The church authorities, the high authorities, the Pharisees and the scribes were in Jerusalem, but they were not suffering at all. As a matter of fact, they were playing ball with the Romans, and they were corrupt. They were taxing the little people, the common people. They were taxing them, and so that's the people that Jesus was talking to mostly. But of course, the scribes and the Pharisees came to hear him so that they could challenge what he had to say. So, but the idea of God, all right, people thought of God as some far off, mysterious, awesome, and fearsome deity who would come with swift judgment to punish wicked people and nations. So just keep that in mind. We know that that is not what Jesus taught, but keep in mind that this is what the people understood. And so Jesus was trying to teach this idea of the spiritual kingdom and God's presence using parables. Jesus' prime objective in telling parables was to interpret the kingdom, which is God's sovereign presence. So the parable we're going to look at tonight, commonly it is referred to as the parable of the leaven, or Dr. Errico has named it the covert kingdom. And keep in mind that Jesus didn't title his parables. We titled them, and scholars titled them whomever. So that's why it does kind of have different names. And this parable is found in both Luke and Matthew. And I'll just read one of them. I'll read Matthew. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like the leaven, which a woman took and buried in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. Now, this is a one-liner parable, but it's full of lots of stuff. Okay, so so let's take a look at this. And remember, this is one of these parables where Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like. All right, so you have to get an understanding of the like, which was back then, and not necessarily. We can sort of understand it now, but we have to look at the culture back then. Okay. All right. So here we have bread making. I don't know how many of you, I don't see people baking bread from scratch too much anymore, but of course, that's what they did. Back then, they didn't have all the technology and whatnot that we have today. So we have this small amount of dough. All right, and let's look at the 2 main ingredients in bread, baking bread. The 2 main ingredients are yeast, which is the leaven, okay, and flour. All right, so the yeast and the flour are mixed together to form dough. All right, but when you first mix it, it looks like this on the left. And then the yeast ferments and causes the bread to rise. The yeast, and so one of the points here is that the yeast in the bread cannot be seen. You don't know it's there. Okay, it is hid, and so therefore searching for the kingdom, because the presence of God, the Spirit of God, the presence is, you cannot see it. And that's what makes it very difficult to teach. And Jesus used this and many parables so that people could understand what he was saying about the spiritual kingdom. Now, another interesting thing about this parable has to do with the woman. Now, remember the status of women in Jesus' time was they had no status, okay, except they in the home, and every day they baked bread, and otherwise they were bought and sold, and all of that. So when Jesus mentioned a woman, okay, it it was an affront basically to the religious cultural notions about women. Jesus' audience realizes this surprising barb when he compares God's sovereignty, he compares the kingdom, God's presence, to a lowly woman doing an ordinary mundane action of preparing bread for baking. And this really raised the eyebrows, not just of the Pharisees and the scribes, which I'm sure really hit them, but even the common people who were listening, um, because of the status of women. How could Jesus compare God's great and all-powerful sovereign presence to a woman? And not only did he compare the kingdom to a woman, but to a woman doing a household womanly thing. Okay, that's the other interesting thing about this parable. Now, another interesting thing, which we don't realize unless we understand the culture. Okay, there's humor here. Jesus was using humor, and we also know it as amplification. The humor, okay, Jesus uses exaggeration, which we call amplification, when he says 3 measures of flour. Okay, now 3 measures of flour is equivalent to 50 pounds, and so it was uh, it was humorous. Jesus injected this humor uh, into the story and used uh, the amplification because it wasn't just Jesus that did use parables then and now. Near Eastern, it's very typical of Near Eastern speaking and writing. Okay, so he used it basically to frame his story and show the great significance of the kingdom. Now let's get to the leaven, and because he says God's presence or the kingdom, whichever you want to say, is like leaven. Okay, leaven, the leaven was hidden, okay, and in the bread, and it ferments, but it takes a while for the dough to rise, okay, um, and so that we can understand it, it's it's the awareness of God's presence that that happens when the dough rises. And it happens to us as humans because, all right, they were not understanding what spirit really was and whatnot. And so just from this one talk that Jesus did, or this told this parable this one time, uh, they were not going to get the message, so to speak, because it takes a while. It takes a long time to become aware of God's presence and his counsel. It takes a long time. Okay. So the yeast causes fermentation and the dough rises. And in the case back then, um, it's really not different than from now, because what had to happen and what has to happen with us is, all right, the yeast, the yeast also causes, I'll use the word, um, um, it takes, it takes out the the bad stuff in the bread, so to speak. We'll just say that. And so, but what that represents is the the teachings, the beliefs, and the knowledge that the people back then had, and now it represents an unraveling of religious teachings that are not about the spirit, the spiritual part of things, but um, but are formed with doctrines and dogmas. So the rising, um, the rising up of the dough means we will become fully aware of God's presence and guidance in our lives. So, but again, it takes a very long time. And in my case, it's been 20 years. And I think uh, most of the time I understand it. But hey, it just takes a while. And that's why Jesus had a problem teaching it sometimes, and we have a problem teaching it sometimes, but that's why we continue. Okay. And so I just wanted to put this in. We go back to the Aramaic word malkutha, and meaning counsel. Um, and if we go back to the Lord's Prayer, traditionally we say, um, "Thy kingdom come." Okay, and from the Aramaic translation, we will say, "Let your counsel come." And this is the idea. This is the idea of turning to God and listening for the guidance and the counsel. And of course, that's the main thing that we teach. That's the main thing, basically, that Jesus taught and demonstrated also. So we have to recognize who and what God is to establish a trusting relationship with God and follow his guidance. And so we have to remember that God is spirit, God is love. And I just kind of had to put this in here because when you do become aware of when people become aware of the presence of God in their lives, uh, I think many of the reasons why many people haven't gotten to this point, number one, because they don't understand that God is spirit. But then, even if they do, it's again unraveling that image of God that appears in many of the doctrines and dogmas of Christianity, and that is still yet uh, a God who is going to judge you, a God who keeps a book, and 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 a God who is can be angry or can be wrathful, and and of course we still in many cases believe that God punishes the world by sending uh, earthquakes and tornadoes. So I just wanted to put that in there uh, because you do have to have a kind of beyond belief. Okay, belief is one thing, but knowing, and of course once you when you're in that rising process, when you finally when you finally I say you finally feel that essence and that guidance within you, then that's that's the risen dove to the top. So, and again, the fermentation process in our world today is unraveling religious principles, dogmas, doctrines that contradict Jesus' teachings. Um, and that it is unfortunate, and maybe contradict isn't quite the right word, but uh, that's okay. Anyway, when we become aware of the power of God's presence and guidance and practice the teachings of Jesus, we will rejoice and live a life of love, joy, and happiness now, here, not wait to go to heaven, living in the presence of God. We appreciate your contributions and thank you. We are very grateful for them. And that ends the presentation. Thank you all and have a great night.